This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What I'm about to describe doesn't arrive with sirens. It doesn't trigger alerts. It doesn't even look illegal at first glance. It looks administrative, procedural, quiet, and that is the danger. Somewhere deep inside the machinery of government, a rule changed without a vote. Money stopped being neutral. Support stopped being automatic, and obedience quietly became a condition, not written down, not announced, just applied. If you live in the right place, things continue. If you don't, they stall. Projects pause. Services thin out. The future becomes conditional. Most people never see this happen. They only feel the aftershocks. Confusion first, then instability. Stay with me. This matters more than it sounds. Because once this switch flips, it doesn't flip back on its own. And to understand how we got here, you have to stop looking at people and start looking at power. Here's the mistake most people make. They assume the system is still driven by law, by budgets, by rules written down and followed. It isn't. What controls the system now is discretion. Who decides when money moves? Who decides when it doesn't? And how much explanation is required before nothing happens at all? Congress can authorize. Statutes can instruct, but execution lives somewhere else. In practice, the system is now governed by delay, by pauses that look temporary, by reviews that never quite end, by approvals that wait for the right conditions. And the conditions are no longer technical. They're political. This isn't about changing policy. It's about changing incentives. If compliance keeps things moving and resistance slows them down, the signal is clear. No memo required, no order signed. The system learns. Institutions adapt. States adjust their expectations downward. And once that logic takes hold, power doesn't need to announce itself. It just waits. What looks like normal process becomes leverage. And that leverage spreads quietly into places no one was watching. Which brings us to what changed first. For a long time, federal money worked the same way. You qualified. You applied. You planned. States built budgets years in advance. Cities signed contracts assuming continuity. Agencies hired staff on the assumption that approved funds would arrive. That was the baseline. Predictability. Then something subtle shifted. Not overnight, not loudly. The money didn't disappear. It hesitated. Funds approved by Congress didn't flow on schedule. Reviews multiplied. Criteria blurred. Deadlines softened into suggestions. Before, disagreement didn't affect delivery. Now, alignment speeds it up. Before, federal support was national. Now, it's conditional. And the most dangerous part is how normal this started to feel. Delays can always be explained. There's always a reason. A process, a technicality. But when slowdowns map cleanly onto political geography, that's no longer friction. That's design. States didn't lose funding all at once. They lost certainty. And without certainty, planning collapses. You stop building, you stop hiring, you stop committing to the future. This wasn't a crisis yet. It was worse. It was normalization, and then the first real shock hit. The shift became visible when the money didn't just slow down, it stopped. Billions of dollars, already approved, already allocated, suddenly frozen. Not nationwide, selectively. Clean energy projects, long planned, contractually committed, were cut off in specific states. The justification was procedural. The pattern was political. Funding continued in places that supported the administration. It vanished in places that didn't. This wasn't a budget adjustment. Congress had already spoken. This was enforcement after the fact. States were told nothing had been canceled, just paused. Under review indefinitely. Construction timelines broke. Investors hesitated. Workforces were left in limbo. And the message landed exactly where it was meant to. Support flows. Opposition waits. If you're wondering how something this blunt could happen without triggering alarms, You're not alone. That question matters because this wasn't the story. It was the signal, and once the signal is understood, the mechanism behind it becomes impossible to ignore. Here's how the system actually works. The damage doesn't come from a single order. It comes from fragmentation. Money moves through layers, agencies, offices, review boards, each with just enough discretion to slow things down without stopping them outright. No one says no. They just don't say yes. And that difference matters. Because when funds are delayed, the cost doesn't land on Washington. It lands on states, on cities, on contractors who've already spent money they were told was coming. Who benefits is obvious. The center keeps leverage without taking responsibility. The pain is distributed outward, quietly, unevenly. Clean energy projects stall. Social services wobble. Budgets built on federal commitments start to crack. And when states complain, the answer is always procedural. Still under review, still being evaluated, still lawful, technically. That's the trick. By the time the harm is visible, the paperwork looks clean. No headline violation, no smoking gun, just outcomes. And once this model proves effective, it doesn't stay confined to one program. It scales, which is exactly what happened next. The pace picked up, not slowly, all at once. Energy funding stalled in one place. Social service money froze in another. Childcare programs were suddenly uncertain. Election support was put at risk. Different agencies, same behavior. Short notices, vague explanations, no timelines. States scrambled. Budgets had to be rewritten mid-year. Services planned months in advance were pulled back in weeks. This wasn't targeting a single policy. It was pressure across domains. If you relied on federal money to keep systems running, you felt it. If you didn't, you didn't. And that contrast was the point. The more essential the program, the stronger the leverage. Energy, healthcare, elections, all slowed, all made conditional. And just as the consequences began to surface, something unexpected happened. The system hit resistance, not from voters, not from elections, from somewhere designed to be boring, the courts. This is where it stops being abstract. Because this isn't happening to states, it's happening to you. When childcare funding freezes, parents don't get a memo. They get a call, or they don't, and the center just closes. When energy projects stall, bills don't go down, they go up. Reliability drops. Jobs disappear quietly. When social services wobble, nothing crashes immediately. Support thins. Wait lists grow. The margin for error vanishes. And you're told this is temporary, administrative, out of anyone's hands. But here's the thing you're not supposed to notice. None of this depends on need or urgency or outcomes. It depends on alignment. If you live in the wrong place, the system slows around you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you're useful as leverage. If this feels unsettling, it should. Because once governance becomes conditional, citizenship does too. Share this, not to persuade, but to document, because the next phase doesn't stay domestic. It never does. The moment money becomes conditional at home, it doesn't stay contained. Capital notices first. International investors don't parse speeches. They read risk. And what they saw was volatility, where stability used to be. Projects approved under law were suddenly reversible, not by courts, by politics. That changes the math. Energy partners recalibrate. Infrastructure timelines stretch. Contracts quietly add premiums for uncertainty. This isn't ideological. It's mechanical. When federal commitments depend on electoral alignment, the country stops looking unified. It starts looking segmented, uneven, unreliable. Allies notice too. If states can be punished financially for political disagreement, what does that say about long-term guarantees? About continuity across administrations? The signal travels outward fast. This is not just a domestic management issue anymore. It's a credibility problem. And credibility, once cracked, is expensive to rebuild. What was once internal leverage becomes external doubt. Markets hesitate. Partners hedge. Projects slow. And while the system absorbs that damage quietly, the pressure inside doesn't ease. It compounds. Which brings us to the future, where acceleration replaces control. From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are stable. The first is adjustment. Institutions adapt. Courts intervene constantly. Congress patches holes as they appear. The system keeps moving, but only through friction. Governance becomes reactive. Permanent emergency mode. The second is erosion. Delays normalize. Selective enforcement becomes expected. States plan around unpredictability instead of law. Federal power still exists, but trust in it doesn't. Nothing breaks dramatically. It just works worse every year. And then there's rupture. That's when conditional governance stops being subtle. When retaliation is no longer denied, when courts are ignored or overwhelmed, when states stop assuming federal commitments mean anything at all, none of these paths require a single dramatic decision. They emerge from repetition, from the same behavior applied again and again and again. The most dangerous part is that all three paths can look identical at first. Administrative, procedural, manageable, until they aren't. And the choice between them isn't made in one moment. It's made by what's tolerated next. Which leaves one final question hanging. There's a temptation at this point to look for reassurance. A ruling, a vote, a correction that snaps everything back into place. That's not how this ends. Because the danger here was never a single decision. It was the precedent. The quiet acceptance that federal power could be used selectively and survive. Once that idea enters the system, it doesn't need to win every time. It just needs to exist. Every future administration notices it. Every agency remembers it. Every delay becomes suspect. Every approval feels earned instead of owed. And that changes how people behave long before laws change. If you're waiting for the moment this becomes obvious, you'll miss it. Obvious comes last. After normalization, after adaptation, this is the part where attention matters more than outrage, where documentation matters more than prediction. Because the system is still deciding what it will tolerate, stay with this story. Not for comfort, but for clarity. The next phase won't announce itself. And if you're not watching closely, it will already be underway when you feel it. Follow, because this isn't over.